Hey, folks, and welcome back to Glenn and Adrian's Rock Talk. This is
Hey,
Adrian. Hey, how you doing, Adrian? Like that? I like that shirt.
oh, thank you.
Yeah, it really takes me back to the early days of Pink Floyd, which we're going to be talking about today in the form of their Relics album, which was a compilation from 1971 that included some of their early singles and various tracks off their first three albums. This is probably the album that brought me into the early Pink Floyd realm for the first time.
Oh, yeah.
It's been great. Now, it was trying to do things that some would argue still haven't really been done. For example, actually compile all of the early Pink Floyd songs into singles into one place. Some people fault it for not being that, and I can't say as I blame them. But at the time, I had no idea about some of the earlier singles.
Oh, yeah. This album was my introduction to Syd Barrett. He was the guitarist and lead singer, and he was the chief songwriter of the first album by Pink Floyd.
Piper at the Gates of Dawn, which we've done a video on, as a matter of fact.
Yes, we have.
Well, I can tell you a few things about that time period. At that time, of course, the big album that was out when we were just getting into it was The Wall. Now, The Wall didn't necessarily make the biggest impression on either of us. However, it made some impression because everybody in our high school and junior high school was singing, "We don't need no education." And so there we were, and a friend of mine had the album, and we sat and listened to it, especially side 3, which has "Hey You" and "Comfortably Numb," and that's a good side. That's probably my favorite side of the album. But that caused me to start looking for other Pink Floyd material that was out there. First thing I came up with was this Works album, which came out about the same time. I think the record company was also waiting for Floyd to come out with their next album after The Wall. This came out.
I see Emily play on that one, doesn't it?
It's got, and Arnold, Layne, and a few other songs that really were considered kind of hidden away and not yet released, like Embryo was one. That was probably the big one. For some reason, they put out a couple of remixed tracks from Dark Side of the Moon, which is a little curious today. Mm-hmm. But so I liked this, but it did seem a little bit incomplete. It also had a song from Metal on it, Fearless, which is a nice song, but it's like, well, why is this here, and it had kind of a track from Ummagumma on it. And
several species.
Several species.
That's a great one, I think.
Yeah, that's a nice sound collage. Roger by then was deep into the sound collages right there with Nick. And of course, they had an Obscured by Clouds track, too. But we thought, well, that's nice, Eventually, Final Cut came out, and that really didn't do much of anything for me. I don't know about you, Adrian.
Oh, really?
So I kept looking back at all the earlier albums, and this had kind of been a starter. And then I came across this, and I almost didn't buy it because it had Arnold, Layne and See Emily Play on it, which was also on Works. But come to find out, I took a closer look at it, and I didn't have any of the albums that this was made up of. I didn't have Piper at the Gates of Dawn, which it has some tracks that are just specifically from that album. I note that some of them are from the UK only. So that would make sense if they're going after the American audience. However, there were some that were also on the U.S. version, so I didn't understand that. For example, See Emily Play was on the U.S. version.
First song on the American release, the original American release of Piper.
Yeah, which a friend of mine had, and I couldn't understand. I said, "How come your Piper has so few songs on it?" I was a little bit incredulous. And, it turned out he had the U.S. version. So I'm like, oh, you're missing all kinds of things. You're missing Flaming. You're missing Bike. You're missing Astronomy, Domine, which are all there on the U.K. version. But they were not on the American, and they just stuck See Emily Play on there. And I thought, well, so I think they were trying to rectify that a little bit. But that doesn't explain why they have the 9-minute version of Interstellar Overdrive on here. Now, there is a potential reasoning behind having the 9-minute Interstellar Overdrive, it turns out that there is a 3-minute version of Interstellar Overdrive.
There's a lot of versions of that one.
Yeah. Do you know where the 3-minute version came from?
I'm not sure. I know there's a 6-minute version on Dark Side of the Moon, not Moon, but Moo.
No, as a matter of fact, that's the 3-minute version.
Oh,
I was going to bring that up. Here we have the infamous Dark Side of the Moo bootleg vinyl. We actually bought this in 1986, which, according to Wikipedia, is the exact year it was released. This thing sold 15,000 copies, and as you note, it's kind of making a parody of the Atom Heart Mother photo, and apparently the bootlegger took this photo himself and the one on the back, which is also very nice, and called it, yes, Dark Side of the Moo. This thing apparently sold 15,000 copies. It was a really nicely done bootleg album of the mid-'80s. This was the time we would buy them because there were things you just couldn't get any other way. There was no internet. There was no way. So on here, yes, we've got things like the astronomy domine that was missing from the Pink Floyd American Piper. So, okay, good, that's there. And then Candy in a Currant Bun, which was, I believe, the side B of Arnold Layne, of their first single. And that one could have made it onto here, but they did not put it on here. They put one track each from the first 5 Pink Floyd singles, but three of those 5 times it was the B-side. So we didn't get things that are on this album, such as Apples and Oranges, It Would Be So Nice, which is a nice enough song, and Point Me at the Sky. Those were the A-sides. I kind of understand why maybe Floyd didn't want to include those at the time, because they are a little bit weaker than Syd Barrett's singles. In my opinion, they were nice enough tracks, but they really did not reach the same level as other Pink Floyd compositions, even at that time, I think. So I kind of understand that. And yeah, they've got the Interstellar Overdrive here that's 3 minutes long, which suggests that maybe they were preparing it for a single release, and I don't know, did it not happen? Was it just a BBC release? Anybody that knows the answer to that question, please leave it below. We'd really love to hear it. When was Interstellar Overdrive, the 3-minute, 4-second version, released, and in what form? Because I know it wasn't on this. And then this rounds out with Scream Thy Last Scream, which would have been another interesting track to have on here. It was another Syd track.
Well, it was recorded about the same time as Vegetable Man, and
which they didn't even release.
About the time of Syd's maybe collapse, as they would call it, or something like that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, Vegetable Man, of course, being kind of Syd's autobiographical piece about himself. The rest of the band found it pretty disturbing, actually. So they actively avoided releasing that for a long time. It did eventually come out, I think, in the 90s. So Scream Thy Last Scream was never officially released until maybe recently. I don't know, but... So that one and Vegetable Man have always kind of been the dark horses. The rest of Dark Side of the Moo is really other stuff that came a little bit later on and was a little bit more for movie soundtracks. So we're going to go back to side 1, See Emily Play.
Emily Play was originally called Games for May. It was actually a promotional piece for an event called Games for May, which was a free concert. Yeah, so they had that commercial for that, and that became See Emily Play. Yeah,
one of their first singles, I think their second, and probably their most successful with Syd. And so here's the one place where you could get it. For a number of years, this was it, unless you had the single. So this was nice for that. So the next track on here is Remember a Day, which is actually a track that came out on Saucer Full of Secrets.
Yes.
Just a standard track.
Recorded before then, I think, though, because Syd is on the guitar, both the acoustic and the slide guitar in that song. It was actually recorded before David Gilmour.
As a matter of fact, Remember a Day was produced before See Emily Play by 2 weeks.
Oh.
So, that was May of '67. So that was about the same time, probably just Rick trying to write singles to kind of go along with what Sid was producing, but they just didn't happen to put it out as a single. After that, he did put out It Would Be So Nice, but again, that's not on this one, and that's a source of some controversy.
Yeah, another Richard Wright song follows Remember a Day called Paint Box.
That's right, yep. That's November of 67.
Yeah, I find it musically very interesting. There are a lot of intriguing recording techniques done on that song. It's that mix of the song. It's impossible to think about Pink Floyd without thinking about innovative recording techniques.
Yeah, and also sometimes just getting rid of measures out of nowhere, which was kind of something that Sid did a lot. You know, if he had a story and he didn't need extra measures in the verse or the chorus or what have you, he just chopped them right off. And that's kind of the same thing that happens in here on Paintbox.
Yeah.
So that was a pretty strong track. That one, I believe, was originally the B-side.
Apples and Oranges? That's my guess.
That was the B-side for Apples and Oranges. Yeah, for in November of 67. So that wraps side one. So then we get to side two, and we have Julia Dream, which is written by Waters and sung by David Gilmour. And that was the B-side to It Would Be So Nice. That came out in April of 68. That's a real nice track, as a matter of fact.
Oh, yeah.
I think really with the passing of time, Julia Dream has weathered much better than It Would Be So Nice, which, while nice, is a very much of its time piece of pop psychedelia. And that's followed now by Careful With That Axe, Eugene, which is a track that has shown up on lots of set lists over the years. They played it at Pompeii.
Yes, Live at Pompeii, DVD. That's a good performance of it.
Yep, and as you mentioned, it also kind of formed the basis for one of their tracks on Zabriskie Point, which has come in number
51, Your Time Is Up.
Yep.
I thought that was an earlier version of Careful With That Axe.
It's essentially the same type. It's the same piece, but just with maybe slightly different variations here and there. It's the same engine. That was the B-side for Point Me at the Sky.
Oh.
And that was December 68. So even in late 68, they were still trying to put out these kind of quasi-psychedelic singles, and they weren't really working that well. But the B-sides were, as it turned out, had more durability and memorability than the actual A-sides there. So then that brings us to the tracks that come off of More. This is the film soundtrack that they did, which works as their third album. And this starts with Cirrus Minor. Do you have some thoughts on this one, Adrian?
Oh, Cirrus Minor. That was one of my favorite songs from the album. Back when I first got introduced to it. This was way back in like 1985. But I remember there was one time, actually a few times, when I hooked up a keyboard to this giant speaker and pointed it outside the third floor window in my bedroom. And I think one time you actually crossed a very busy intersection that we were living near.
Yeah.
And you could still hear it quite clearly.
Oh, yeah. Serenading the neighborhood.
Had the cops called on me or anything.
Serenading the neighborhood with Cirrus Minor. That was
yes. Oh, that was fun.
And so that one is followed by the Nile song, which has got to be the most hard rock heavy track that Floyd ever made. And it took me a while to realize that Rick Wright isn't even on this one. It's just a three-piece Floyd. Gilmour, Waters, and Mason. And they're just rocking it out. And
there's no keyboards in that song, is there?
No. Kind of the funny thing. Yeah, it's one of those things you suddenly realize that there's a sound missing. So I understand that the actual movie isn't that great. The soundtrack may seem a little scattershot to some, but I've always liked it just as a mood piece. I listened to it on its own just for fun, even though there are some things like the Spanish piece with David Gilmour licking his fingers and speaking Spanish or whatever he's doing. Some things age better than others.
Yeah.
But in any case, that made for a nice little entry on here, just to give us an idea of what Floyd was up to after they were trying to make those little psychedelic tracks, singles, So after that, we come up with the song that was completely previously unreleased, which is Biding My Time.
Well, yeah, it was recorded in 1969 and did not get put on any type of vinyl until Relics.
Mm-hmm.
It starts with a very jazzy type vibe to it, and it has Rick Wright on the trombone, by the way. But in the middle, you hear the trombone, and then it goes into this really rocking jam, for pretty much the rest of the song. And the song ends in a good way. It just ends in like one of those, big endings.
Well, all I know about this track, besides having heard it at the time too, I always considered it kind of the low point of this album because it was just the one that had the least amount of payoff. After all these other great tracks, there's this track, which is kind of a dull one. There are some things that Roger Waters was doing at the time that I wasn't too big a fan of, like when he did Saint-Tropez on Metal, and some people like that track, but it just kind of struck me as, well, it's just kind of, it's all right, but it's kind of doesn't do much for me.
Right. It's very, very much.
It almost feels like a filler track, or like they could have tried a little harder and got a better song,
Yeah.
But I know that it was part of The Man in the Journey, which was a big conceptual piece that they would play in about 1969. And it just never made an album, but several of the tracks made it onto various albums. And they include a lot of the tracks on here, or tracks on those albums. For example, Grantchester Meadows from Ummagumma, Cymbeline, and Green is the Color, which both come off of the Moore soundtrack. They're actually the most Floyd of all the songs on the soundtrack, I would say. Then there's Careful with That Axe, The Narrow Way, which was Dave Gilmour's Ummagumma contribution, and then Power Talk H, which was on Piper. And they were doing parts of A Saucer Full of Secrets, or things that would have been part of that same piece had it continued, things like that. And that's one of those things that you can find on bootlegs, but I generally don't seek it out. I've listened to it a few times, and it's nice, but I tend to like the albums that Floyd completed.
Yeah.
They have some very good live music, but for the most part, I enjoyed what made the records, including the live Ummagumma, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's another album with a good version of Careful with That Axe.
Yeah.
Closest thing to the issue I had with Careful with That Axe is that actually the performance that's on this record, not that I don't really like it, because I do, but it's probably my least favorite performance that I've heard of Careful with That Axe, because it's really a lot better played live, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
There's something about Roger screaming that adds a lot to that song. And on this version, on this album, there's some of that there, but not very much.
Yeah, they don't really reach that fevered climax. And he's like, careful with that X, Eugene. That part is very muted.
Live performances of that song, and they're all great. I like them all better than the recorded versions, I guess.
Yeah.
That's just what I think about Careful with That Axe anyway. It's a good song, but there are other versions that are better.
Agreed. So overall, I would say that this is still an important Floyd album. It's not perfect. There are definitely choices that I would have made that were different than the ones that they made. I might have actually included one of the earlier A-sides. I don't know, maybe Point Me at the Sky or something. Biding My Time, I mean, this album as it is a little long for vinyl. I think it's 49 minutes long. So they could have done without that one. Bike, I don't understand, unless they were trying to...
psychedelic masterpiece, in my opinion.
Sure, but I mean, it's already on another album that's also a masterpiece. So that one is very confusing. But the good thing about this record is, if you don't have any experience with the early Floyd, this is a great way to dip your toes in the water and get a sense of what they were about. You're not really risking much, because it is a good listen on its own. Even Biding My Time, it's just one track, out of 11 on here, I guess.
Yeah. Even Biding My Time isn't all bad.
It's not terrible. I mean,
Not super, in my opinion, but it's not bad either.
right, yeah. It's kind of slightly unremarkable, but it's still not bad. Yeah. This is a good primer for early Floyd. So if you're just completely clueless of anything before metal, pick this up, and I think you'll be glad you did. You might be surprised though, because they were quite a different band at the time.
I should also note that they had an original release of that album that had artwork by Nick Mason on it. I think they re-released it in 2016 on CD.
Do you know that eventually somebody went and recreated what he had drawn for his artwork and made a real model of it?
Oh, yeah, a 3D version of it?
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, it looks like it was actually created. Somebody actually created it from his plan, which is pretty good. I was impressed.
Anyway, yeah, there's that version, and the version you just showed us with... I hear the two faces on that album. They're actually antique bottle openers.
Yeah, that's what I heard too. Yeah. And it kind of makes sense. I always wondered what these were. I mean, you see them. I've shown this album cover to people, and they've just kind of shuddered and said, "Get that away from me," because it's so confusing. With the two sets of eyes. Like, I'm hallucinating or something. But it turns out they're actually pretty small, and they do that to make a little extra room so you can get your bottle top in there. So this was the American version. I guess there have been other covers as well, but this is the one that I've always identified with the album. Well, so if any of you have experience with this album and would like to share it, please share it down below. If you have any other questions, you can ask those as well. We'll be happy to try to answer them the best we can. And in the meantime, I think we're going to sign off for this week.
See you guys later.
Take care.